know it's been a while since the last one of these, but I want to start doing these kind of videos again where I read some scary stories. They're not all going to be the same. For like anthologies like this, my plan is to just kind of read a couple, but I have some newer collections, some older collections. I'm not going to read whole books, I don't think. Mostly for copyright purposes, but also encouraging people to buy more books. So I might do a couple more parts on this book and then switch to a different book where I might also read, depending on how many short stories there are, maybe half of them or a quarter of them, depending, I guess, also on how new they are. But yeah, I'm going to try to do this twice a month, hopefully. Also, I'm in a different location from the other ones. Depending if more people like these, I might, do a better camera situation. We'll see what happens. One other thing I'm going to start doing in these videos is also talking a little bit about the author or the person who wrote the stories or did the art. So, for example, this collection is collected by Alvin Schwartz, and the designs were by Stephen Gammel. Sorry if I butcher some names, but I just want to give credit to people. And I think I'll also start maybe starting with some information about the book, when it came out, who wrote it, if there was any inspirations or anything like that. All right, like past me just said, we're going to be reading some scary stories. And today we'll be starting with May I Carry Your Basket? Spooky basket. Sam Lewis spent the evening playing chess at his friend's house. It was about midnight when they finished their game, and he started home. Outside it was icy cold, as quiet as the grave. As he came around a turn in the road, he was surprised to see a woman walking ahead of him. She was carrying a basket covered with a white cloth. When he caught up to her, he looked to see who it was, but she was so bundled up against the cold, it was hard to see her face. "Good evening," Sam said. "What brings you out so late?" But she didn't answer. Then he said, "May I carry your basket?" She handed it to him. From under the cloth, a small voice said, "That's very nice of you." And that was followed by wild laughter. Sam was so startled that he dropped the basket and out rolled a woman's head. He looked at the head, and he stared at the woman. "It's her head," he cried, and he started to run, and the woman and her head began to chase him. Soon, the head caught up to him. It bounded into the air and sank its teeth into his left leg. Sam screamed with pain and ran faster. But the woman in her head stayed right behind. Soon, the head leapt again into the air and bit him on his other leg. Then they were gone. Next will be the classic high beams. The girl driving the old blue sedan was a senior at the high school. She lived on a farm about 8 miles away and used the car to drive back and forth. She had driven into town that night to see a basketball game. Now she was on her way home. As she pulled away from the school, she noticed a red pickup truck following her out of the parking lot. A few minutes later, the truck was still behind her. "I guess we're going in the same direction," she thought. She began to watch the truck in her mirror. When she changed her speed, the driver of the truck changed his speed. When she passed the car, so did he. Then he turned on his high beams, flooding her car with light. He left them on for almost a minute. He probably wants to pass me, she thought. But she was becoming uneasy. Usually she drove home over a back road. Not too many people went that way. But when she turned onto the road, so did the truck. "I've got to get away from him," she thought. And she began to drive faster. Then he turned his high beams on again. After a minute, he turned them off. Then he turned them on again and off again. She drove even faster, but the truck driver stayed right behind her. Then he turned on his high beams again. Once more her car was ablaze with light. "What is he doing?" she wondered. "What does he want?" Then he turned them off again, but a minute later he had them on again, and he left them on. At last she pulled into her driveway, and the truck pulled in right behind her. She jumped from the car and ran to the house. "Call the police!" she screamed at her father. Out in the driveway, she could see the driver of the truck, and he had a gun in his hand. When the police arrived, they started to arrest him, but he pointed to the girl's car. "You don't want me," he said. "You want him." He crouched behind the driver's seat. There was a man with a knife. As the driver of the truck explained, the man slipped into the girl's car just before she left the school. He saw it happen, but there was no way he could stop it. He thought about getting the police, but he was afraid to leave her, so he followed her car. Each time the man in the back seat reached up to overpower her, the driver of the truck turned on his high beams. Then the man dropped down, afraid that somebody might see him. A short little song thing called Slithery D. The slithery D, he came out of the sea. He ate all the others, but he didn't eat me. The slithery D, he came out of the sea. He ate all the others, but he didn't eat. Yeah, he got eaten. This next one is the ghost with the bloody fingers. The ghost with the bloody fingers. Also on the back. A businessman arrived at a hotel late one night and asked for a room. The room clerk told him the hotel was all filled up. "There is only one empty room," he said, "but we don't rent that one because it is haunted." "I'll take it," said the businessman. "I don't believe in ghosts." The man went up to the room. He unpacked his things and he went to bed. As soon as he did, a ghost came out of the closet. Its fingers were bleeding, and it was moaning, "Bloody fingers, bloody fingers." When the man saw the ghost, he grabbed his things and ran. The next night, a woman arrived very late. Again, all the rooms were taken, except the haunted room. "I'll sleep there," she said. "I'm not afraid of ghosts." As soon as she got into bed, the ghost came out of the closet. Its fingers still were bleeding. It still was moaning, "Bloody fingers, bloody fingers." And the woman took one look and ran. A week later, another guest arrived, very late. He also took the haunted room. After he unpacked, he got out his guitar and he began to play. Soon the ghost appeared. As before, its fingers were bleeding and it was moaning, "Bloody fingers, bloody fingers." The man paid no attention. He just kept strumming his guitar, but the ghost kept moaning and its fingers kept bleeding. Finally, the guitar player looked up. "Cool it, man," he said. "Get yourself a Band-Aid." This next one is called Something Was Wrong. One morning, John Sullivan found himself walking along a street downtown. He could not explain what he was doing there, or how he got there, or where he had been earlier. He didn't even know what time it was. He saw a woman walking toward him and stopped her. "I'm afraid I forgot my watch," he said, and smiled. "Can you tell me the time?" When she saw him, she screamed and ran. Then John Sullivan noticed that other people were afraid of him. When they saw him coming, they flattened themselves against a building or ran across the street to stay out of his way. "There must be something wrong with me," John Sullivan thought. "I'd better go home." He hailed a taxi, but the driver took one look at him and sped away. John Sullivan did not understand what was going on, and it scared him. "Maybe somebody at home can come and get me," he thought. He found a telephone and called his wife, but a voice he did not recognize answered. "Is Miss Sullivan there?" he asked. "No, she's at a funeral," the voice said. "Mr. Sullivan was killed yesterday in an accident downtown." Oh, short and spooky. Rings on her fingers. I guess also if you have any suggestions for stories from this book or other ones, let me know. Comment, that's a thing. Daisy Clark had been in a coma for more than a month when the doctor said that she had finally died. She was buried on a cool summer day in a small cemetery about a mile from her home. "May she always rest in such peace," her husband said. But she did not. Late that night, a grave robber with a shovel and a lantern began to dig her up. Since the ground was still soft, he quickly reached the coffin and got it open. His hunch was right. Daisy had been buried wearing two valuable rings, a wedding ring with a diamond in it, and a ring with a ruby that glowed as that glowed as if it were alive. The thief got down on his knees and reached into the coffin to get the rings, but they were stuck fast on her fingers. So he decided that the only way to get them off was to cut off her fingers with a knife. But when he cut into the finger with the wedding ring, it began to bleed, and Daisy Clark began to stir. Suddenly, she sat up, terrified. The thief scrambled to his feet. He accidentally kicked over the lantern, and the light went out. He could hear Daisy climb out of her grave. As she moved past him in the dark, he stood there frozen with fear, clutching the knife in his hand. When Daisy saw him, she pulled her shroud around her and asked, "Who are you?" When the grave robber heard this corpse speak, he ran. Daisy shrugged her shoulders and walked on and never once looked back. But in his fear and confusion, the thief fled in the wrong direction. He pitched headlong into her grave, fell on the knife, and stabbed himself. While Daisy walked home, the thief bled to death. All right, the last one we'll do is the window. Margaret and her brothers Paul and David shared a small house on top of a hill just outside the village. It was so warm one summer's night that Margaret could not sleep. She sat up in bed in the darkness of her room, watching the moon move across the sky. Suddenly, something caught her eye. She saw two small yellow-green lights moving through the woods near the graveyard at the bottom of the hill. They looked like the eyes of some animal, but she could not make out what kind of creature it was. Soon the creature left the woods and moved up the hill toward the house. For a few minutes, Margaret lost sight of it. Then she saw it coming across the lawn toward her window. It looked something like a man, and yet it didn't. Margaret was terrified. She wanted to run from her room, but the door was next to her window. She was afraid the creature would see her and break in before she could escape. When the creature turned and moved in another direction, Margaret rushed to the door. Before she could open the door, it was back. Margaret found herself staring through the window at a shrunken face like that of a mummy. Its yellow-green eyes gleamed like a cat's eyes. She wanted to scream, but she was so frightened that she could not make a sound. The creature broke the window glass, unlocked the window, and crawled inside. Margaret tried to flee, but the creature caught her. It twisted its long, bony fingers into her hair, pulled back her head, and sank its teeth into her throat. Margaret screamed and fainted. When her brothers heard her piercing scream, they rushed to her room. But by the time they got the door unlocked, the creature had fled. Margaret lay on the floor, bleeding and unconscious. While Paul tried to stop the bleeding, David chased the creature down the hill toward the graveyard, but he soon lost sight of it. The police thought it was the work of an escaped lunatic who believed he was a vampire. When Margaret recovered, her brothers wanted to move to a safer place where it would be harder to break in, but Margaret refused. The creature would never come back. She was sure of it, but just in case, Paul and David began to keep loaded pistols in their rooms. One night, months later, Margaret was awakened by a scratching sound at the window. When she opened her eyes, there was the same shrunken face staring in at her. That night, her brothers heard her cries in time. They chased the creature down the hill, and David shot it in the leg, but the creature managed to scramble over the graveyard wall and disappeared near an old burial vault. The next day, Margaret and her brothers watched as the sexton of the church opened the burial vault. Inside was a horrifying scene. Broken coffins, bones, and rotting flesh were scattered all over the floor. Only one coffin had not been disturbed. When the sexton opened it, there lay the creature with the shrunken face that had attacked Margaret. The telltale bullet was in its leg. They did the only thing they knew of to rid themselves of a vampire. The sexton built a roaring blaze outside the vault and fed the shrunken body to the flames. They watched the body burn until nothing remained but ashes. So that will conclude this reading for today. Like I said, I might do a part or two more of scary stories, but let me know what I should read next. I have a couple more ideas that I'll talk about later. But yeah, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed some scary stories. Until next time. Peace.